morning. And don't forget that. Okay. All right, let me check. I thought I saw maybe somebody type something. Should turn. Oh yeah. Oh, we are. Life is synchronous. Thanks for the reminder. Okay. All right. So, is gender inequality a current social problem? I do not believe that I went over this one last time. Last time, I think we just got a feeling for, gender. And I think started a good conversation, which is really orientating ourselves within this is important. So let me, I guess, stop real quick because I know that I did ask this. And on Top Hat from the other day, is gender inequality a current social problem? Yes, 60 people said yes. 0 people said no, men and women have the same opportunities. 5 people said not as much as it used to be a few decades ago, therefore should not be as big of a deal in society. And so, we're in, I guess, unanimous or overwhelming agreement that, there are issues and it is gender or issues of gender inequality are a current social problem. And I think we understand that anyway, but we are in agreement, at least in that part of it right there. Sorry, just thinking. Okay, so let's look at the 17th century. Women could not vote, own property, keep their own wages if they were married, draft a will, file lawsuits in court, attend college, for starters, right? If we look at gender inequality and we fast forward a bit to when I was born in the 1970s, a magical time where concussions didn't exist and nobody had cell phones. I know. What are we looking at as far as gender pieces and gender inequality? Babies born given the name of their father. This is still a pretty common practice. Girls cannot play in little leagues. I think that has changed to a certain degree. Almost all teachers are female. We're still seeing pretty big discrepancies in gender pieces in education. High school principals or administrations are primarily male. We find that continues on into higher education. And so that's where I think it's interesting to look at the consciousness of a particular department. I'm always pro sociology department because I really love the social department, but I know and have looked at over the last 15 years or so hiring practices and just the elevated consciousness of that differs from school to school, and it certainly differs from high school to college, and it differs then particularly even within departments. So females half is likely to qualify for national merit scholarships since most of the questions favor boys or at least gender biased. We know that a lot of these standardized tests are biased in as far as race. What if we're not talking about women's rights? What if we're talking, and not in the 1970s, about the trans community? Where are we looking at in as far as transgender rights? Do they exist? What efforts are being made right now to protect those rights? And then, of course, we know right now, and in the last while, these rights visibly under attack, and not just these rights, but these individuals under attack. And then, of course, everything is contextual. Nothing exists within a vacuum. So when we look at racism today, it's not like, or discrimination or gender inequality, we don't just look at it in the year 2021. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? We look at colonialism. We look at financial institutions. So we look at a really wide variety, across a wide variety of perspectives, and in a lot of different contexts. So I would say, I guess the next question for a lot of these things would be why? Briefly, why do trans rights, why are they under such visible, outward, and open, I don't want to use violent metaphors, but it is in this way. Why are they under attack? Why are they under threat of losing, these individuals under the threat of losing rights that seem obvious? Anybody What do you think? I'm seeing this, I'm perceiving at least this discrimination as being more intense than it was 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, from a legislative perspective, from an observational perspective. Anyone?
My only thought is that it's a community that a lot of people don't understand, maybe.
Okay, yep. Perhaps not as much understanding of this community, and so therefore leading to a lot of misunderstanding. Okay, good. What else? Or why else? And I'm certainly not saying that this is just happening, but I'm saying it's intensified recently. I think a lack of understanding is one thing, but sorry, what were you gonna say?
It's all right. Maybe because like it's perceived as like a new thing.
Okay, so perhaps the perception that these rights or these individuals seeking these rights, that this is a new thing, and so it's attracting the attention of folks that have or are underinformed or misinformed. Maybe it's attracting the attention of the wrong folks. Anything else? Any other thoughts? All right. So these are the same questions that we ask, not the same, of course, but they're questions that we ask of every single chapter. So what are some issues women, men, transgender individuals face today? Excuse the typo. What are some evolving changes to our gender expectations? I would say that we could look at a question like, why is the trans community facing an intensified discrimination or attack? Maybe, what does it look like when our gender expectations evolve? And as that happens, how is that difficult for dominant culture or dominant gender in societies to perceive and deal with that? Why is it difficult to observe gender stratification today in ways? And you could say, how is it obvious? How is gender stratification obvious? You can look at that from a lot of different perspectives. And how is gender stratification reinforced over time? So these are just, I think, some of the questions that as sociologists, as we want to get to people's understanding of gender. And I think that we're going to find out almost immediately that people confuse the very basics, and that would be sex and gender. And that I think that, not in a sociology class, not in our microcosm, in the greater society, there is less understanding about that. So before we get to that, are those distinctions and those differences between gender and sex and our gender roles, things that we're going to talk about, let's look at this question. And really, I'm interested in the why or why not, if you want to participate. But I find it really, really, really interesting when our class is split. A lot of times in sociology, they have like a very high level of agreement, right? And that's, it's fairly understandable. It happens all the time, particularly in my Soc 220 class, right? Where we have 150 people that are taking environmental sociology because they're invested some way in that concept, right? That could be, I'm tying myself to a tree because I'm protesting environmental injustice. That could be, I come from a conservative family that hunts and processes our own meat. But still, that class, there's a whole bunch of people in there, so we agree quite often. So whenever classes sort of are split down the middle, I think it's interesting, and particularly when we're talking about something like race or gender. So does your gender matter to you? Yes, quite a bit. 38 people, no, not very much. 26 people. We are not exactly split down the middle, but we are as split as we have been in a while. So does your gender matter to you? How, why, or why not? In what ways? If you want to participate, now is the time. I'm going to take a drink of coffee.
I guess I can say something on that. Well, for me personally, my gender doesn't really matter that much to me. Like I identify as she, they, and honestly, if we just completely got rid of gender, it wouldn't change me as a person at all. Like I wouldn't be any different if my gender was non-existent or different, and so I don't really think it matters as much to me.
Good, thank you. Other thoughts?
I would have to agree with Lori. I don't think it matters that much to me. I do use the she, her, and hers pronouns though, but I've always kind of leaned more towards like masculine stuff. Like I like cars. I like getting dirty in the mud. Like I like that kind of thing that's not really seen as feminine. And so I feel like I kind of cross those lines anyway. So it doesn't really matter.
And I think for so long we've been told that it's binary, right? We've been misinformed that it's this or this. And wow, right? That's not very three-dimensional. It doesn't leave a lot of room for what you're talking about, for identifying as she, but having a whole lot of masculine traits or interests, or that society deems as masculine or whatever that might be. So good contribution. Others, because we do have 12 more people saying that it's very important, or that it is important. Any other thoughts? And oh, sorry, go ahead.
I don't think actually I can't remember what to put down. But I guess
That's
to
all right.
me it's not very important, but it's not important either to me. Like I don't think about my gender with every waking moment or whatever. But it is something you have to consider that it will and literally impact me for the literal rest of my life, It's gonna impact what I'm able to do and like employment and like with what I want to do with the rest of my life. So it can't be like non-existent in me.
Right. So not thinking about it all the time, but undeniably an important factor in some of the biggest parts of your life. Absolutely. Other thoughts?
For me, I would say my gender isn't really important to me, but I identify as like a cisgendered woman and I use pronouns she, hers, and hers. And I have some siblings who I've seen gender be really important to them. And I've had family who's not accepting and open to that gender. So I do think in some aspects, and for some people, especially those like who'd use specific pronouns, it is important because it doesn't define who they are, but at the same time it's like it is who they are and who they want to be.
Good. Yep. Important thought. Other thoughts? And I just want to say I appreciate everybody still participating virtually in the last part of the semester. Like honestly, that's to me super appreciated. Yeah, because I get it. I actually never thought so much about gender in 20 some years as when the boys were little and gender was really important to other people, like their gender, figuring out their gender, because both boys had like really long hair for like the longest time. I just let them do whatever. If they want a mohawk, I still have the same policy. You want to shave your head, you want to dye it purple, whatever. But it was years of really confused other people that needed me to give them an answer about their gender, which, yeah, I guess was surprising to me at 32 when they were born, or 33, and kind of continued to sort of be the same way. But so important their gender to other people's understandings of them when they were really little too. So I could never quite understand that. Like, how much does that matter on the playground swinging on a swing at 3 or 4 or 5? But to parents and to other adults, seems really important to grasp. Yeah, other thoughts or any other thoughts?
I think I said that gender was important to me. Mostly just like in a sense that gender as a whole is very important to society, not necessarily that it should be like one or the other. Um, but I think like there's a lot of boundaries that should be crossed and need to be crossed as in society as a whole. Just like I think gender is important for like you should respect other people's genders and you have the ability to create your own gender, like whatever you want, you know?
Right, good. I'm looking here at the notes. Can I ask what people asked about your kids' gender? Like, how did they phrase it? Yeah, of course. People would do a lot of fishing. People would be confused because their hair was really long and really like Zion's is like white blonde. He's the guy with the really long dreads now. He's going to cut those off to freak everybody out in a couple weeks right before the end of school. And Storm would have really long hair and they'd be in Spider-Man outfit with camo and people would say things like, she's so free spirited. And I, and then they would wait for me to either correct them or not. And as a sociologist on occasion, I would be like, she is. And because I just don't care to have that conversation always. And sometimes I would be like, he's a real go-getter. I don't know, you know. So I think that there was a lot of insecurity from other people about super long hair and camo fatigues and ninja swords. And it just, I think to people, something seemed amiss. I don't know what that was, you know, personally or whatever. But, you know, yeah. I guess, I know this is an extreme, but if we're really burning down national forests and people are actually dying in gender reveal things, like that is hard for me to wrap my head around because I come from a time when the technology was not there to know your gender ahead of time or your perceived gender or whatever that means, right? So yeah, a lot of leaning towards the girl thing or their idea of what that is, even though they see masculine traits, and then kind of putting me in a position where I would have to clarify that for them, which, you know, is, I guess, a strategy that people use, you know. So yeah, anyway, okay, good. Any other thoughts on the gender piece and on why it matters or why it doesn't? And I'll get back here to the PowerPoint, or how much, I guess I should say. All right. Okay, so gender inequality. So obviously, right, there's a very complex interaction between biology and culture. And that is what shapes these behavioral differences associated with gender. So here's the difference, right? Sex does not equal gender. So here's the distinction between the two: gender, personal traits and social position that members of a society attach to being female or male. Again, I mean, this is generations of people, you know, just sort of determining that. And I would say more recently, you know, in the last 100 years or so, because most people were born not in hospitals until the last 100 years. And you know, for most of history, you know, there was a distinction, but there wasn't, here's the piece of paper, here's what we're doing, here's how we're defining it, here's the color you got to paint your room. So again, it's important to understand from a sociological perspective that it has to do with personal traits, it has to do with social position, and again, like deviance and so many other things, it doesn't necessarily matter what you think, it's that members of a society are attaching to that, right? Why it's so confusing for a little kid to have camo on and guns strapped to them all over the place and yet have long hair or something. So that's like a difference in the norms, the roles, and the behaviors in a given society, right? with being that, with being male, female, trans, and then I would say these two really need to stand together. So sex, and I know that this is, and I'm going to show a video here in a minute that this person says basically the same thing, but you know, sex is, we're talking about, you know, what's in your pants, the anatomical, biological differences, gender being a much more piece that's in your head, that's in your brain, that is, you know, that is answerable in some pretty obvious questions. And I'm not sure that we're going to get a chance, although maybe we should, because I really love that. And that's the 30 days piece. So anyway, side note, between males and females that originate in human genes. So anatomical and other biological differences versus norms, roles, behaviors, personal traits, social position, and then how that is created by a society, what that means, right? Okay. And this is, I think, what previous generations don't understand, or fail to understand, or refuse to understand, or when they were trying to understand it when they were younger, this society was not there, culture was not there. And that is that sex and gender are fluid, they're dynamic, there's components of them that are socially constructed, right? So transgender, an umbrella term used to describe all those who identify outside of their assigned sex or outside of their gender binary. So outside of the two binary cultural, you know, options that have been given, or that are more prevalent, or that are seen as legitimate. You know, by dominant culture from a functionalist point of view, of course, all of that gender piece is legitimate, but to some people, not, right? And to some people, very. So that's that social piece. Transsexuals, people who use surgery and hormones to change their sex to match their preferred gender. So all of these distinctions, I think, are basic and important. We're only doing 2 chapters again, so important to understand. And now we've got like another dimension or component on top of that, right? Sexuality. So the ways in which people construct their sexual desires and relationships, including the norms governing sexual behavior. I think that dominant culture for a long time has tended to say sexual orientation. And I think that dominant culture focuses on that because they want to focus on, and then we can get deeper into that, but on that as the biggest piece, the sexuality, the sexual behavior, the frequency of that. And then now we're looking at dominant, you know, dominant sexualities versus non-dominant orientations and what that means. And, you know, you could replace, when you're talking about relationship, it could be relationship orientation, love orientation. So there are a lot of different ways to look at it that haven't been, and I mean to look at sociological concepts of sex and gender, right? All right. Of course, culture and society influence gender and gender roles, the attitudes and behaviors considered appropriately masculine, and by appropriately, you know, from a dominant culture perspective, right? And if we have a good grasp on deviance, like I think we can do, or like I think we do this semester, then we can understand that the idea, right? What behaviors are considered appropriately masculine or feminine in a particular culture, and of course, whether we act more masculine or feminine has less to do with our biological sex than with these socially constructed societal gender roles that we have associated with our gender. So what is appropriately masculine? What is appropriately feminine? What's the word appropriately mean? And how does that change in time and space as well? Let me go ahead and stop this share. I want to be able to, I might have parts 1 and 2. Let me stop recording now so that I can show this video piece, and then we won't have to worry about copyrights